Thank you for being here. I would like to just start and make sure everyone knows each other. So maybe you can just share your name, your departments.
This is a good space.
I think anywhere, but when you present, come and stand. Good. So April, you want to start?
Sure. April Dickey, Education.
From this way?
Yeah.
Carrie King, English. Orly Songer, Music, Theater, Dance.
Mark Hogan, Math.
Joey Engel, Education. Melissa Jessup, Education.
Jeremy Ribbleman, Art. Ben Hotmeyer, Education.
Good to have you, and good to have everyone who is also joining us. My name's on this, but we're actually doing this as a department because we all do active learning in different ways. So we're going to go through a few of the reasons we do this, and then we're going to demonstrate some things we can do. Keeping in mind that a lot of active learning is limited by your classroom space. So that can make it a little challenging. But hopefully the things we're doing can be just ideas of how you can also do some things to involve students. So we have a handout for you, and those of you on Zoom, we will get you that handout as well. But what we're going to do today, our objective is to demonstrate some teaching strategies to engage students in 3 areas. So through movement, through engaging with text, and through reflection. So what are ways we can engage them in that way? So there's a definition there of active learning. So it's generally defined as any instructional method that engages students in the learning process. In short, active learning requires students to do meaningful learning activities and think about what they are doing. So it really puts a lot of the learning, the work of the learning onto students, and not just as us as faculty to try to offer them up everything to learn. They have to engage in the learning to participate. And there are a lot of benefits. We just picked out about 5 of them, but there are several, and there are also some resources down below if you want to look at those. But one, students can get what's called cognitive overload. So you might have heard of that. It's just when we have too much information coming at us, we can't process it all. And you can have a few kinds of overload. So like there's an intrinsic load, meaning the material that you're talking about is just difficult. We can't really do a lot about that load. Some things are just hard. So our idea is, how can we make it simple as possible to understand these concepts? We have extraneous load, which are things like a noisy classroom, or it's too cold in the room, or there's a lot of distractions. Those we can minimize by having structure in our classroom, by being as organized, but sometimes we can't always mitigate those either. And then we have extrinsic load, and those would be things that, well, extraneous, those are things that get in the way of the learning, but they do not help the learning process. Okay, so we want to minimize those as much as possible. We don't want to get rid of cognitive load because that means students are learning. So we want some load, but we want the load to be in what we can work with. And then there's germane load, which is, this is what we want to actually maximize. We want to maximize germane load. Germane takes our students to higher thinking. So it's where they say, oh, this reminds me of so-and-so, or I can apply this here, or that makes sense. So yeah, come on in. So, so we want to maximize that. And so this is a way to kind of maximize that. How do they make connections, etc. Also, we help students with self-assessment. If they're actually engaged in the learning process, it is easier for them to realize, oh, I actually don't understand this. Instead of waiting until they're studying for it and then try to figure out, oh, I guess I really didn't understand that. So we do want to do that as well. It helps us with formative assessment. So as we're teaching, sometimes if you say, okay, has everyone got it? Does everyone know what's going on? Welcome. Then it helps us think, okay, they're not making the right connections here. There's some mistakes in their thinking. We need to go back. So it helps us do that. If we never hear from them in those ways, we're not sure. We also want to engage the body and the brain in learning. Our brain works with our body, so the more we can use our body and the more we move and connect those kind of things, the better we will learn. And then the last one is just to build relationships. We build more relationships when we're talking and seeing them work with each other, working with them, etc. So what we've done is we've each picked out a strategy or two that we've used to meet some of these needs. So we're just going to kind of go around. So Melissa is going to do the first one, and
Okay, I'm gonna have him do it.
yes, very good.
Okay.
We're going to try to model.
All right, so I'm giving all of you an index card. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to, okay, go and pass it around. I want you to write on it, and we're going to do a simplified version of it, and then I'll explain the whole thing out next. I'm going to give you a minute to write one takeaway right now from what you just heard. What's an aha that you've had, a takeaway, something that you want to remember as a professor. Okay, you have 21 seconds. All right, everybody's done. Great. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to stand up. I know we're kind of cozy. And when I play the music, you're going to walk around. When the music stops, you're going to share your aha with the person closest to you. Okay, you ready? So you're just walking around the room. You're just moving with your card. Here we go.
We all know that.
This is totally what happens in class, by the way.
Oh, people stop.
You gotta keep moving. You gotta keep moving. Okay, find the closest person. You're going to share with each other, and then you're going to exchange cards. This is called give one, get one. And we're going to do it again, and you're going to have to explain what the person's card, so make sure that you, if you need clarification, you ask them. All right, here we go. So you're sharing right now with each other.
Pretty straightforward. I only heard the last point. Here we go.
I can move through. I don't know if you're going to have to, yeah. My there you go. Yesterday's class. I want them to be okay, you're moving again. All right, move again.
I'm just gonna mix it up.
You're getting in the way.
Okay, new person, you're gonna do the same thing.
Okay. Hi.
Mark likes to have it.
Physical maybe there.
Okay.
My person said, we show body.
You're exchanging cards again. Okay, this is going to be our last time.
Normally a classroom, you could mix it up a little.
Yeah. Okay, new person. Okay, so the next time the music stops, you're going to go back to your seat.
Oh, okay.
Well, my card is about well, it was a quick.
Oh, when did music start? Now you're moving back.
How you doing, okay?
Well, sure. Okay, so now I would like for a couple people to share what's something that someone told you. Okay, this is where you guys talk.
Yeah, the aspect of incorporating physical movement.
All right, great, thank you. Incorporating physical movement. All right, somebody else.
Not just incorporate with the importance of that, but then how that connects to the brain, which then increases engagement and learning of post concept.
Okay, great. Great. So this was a really simplified version of it. So I'm going to go through and the QR code on the handout will lead you to, I have a whole separate handout and I actually have, oh, thank you. You're good. So you can either do this, I have done this for a reading. So maybe they were supposed to read a particular material before class. So we do it at the beginning of the class, scroll up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there we go. Or you can do it partway through a class. I've actually done it both ways. And I have prompts that I want students to respond to on a PowerPoint slide. 1 to 2 questions. It really is to connect with the content in the course that day that we're talking about or the reading. They walk around and I want you to think about what happens when they have to explain their thinking to their classmates. Then they have to explain each other's thinking. And just the depth of processing that happens for them cognitively when they exchange cards and they're moving. And I love music, so I like to do a lot with music, but it just does it's really helpful for kids to get up and move and also for them processing the content. And then the one below it is called Quiz Trade. And it's very similar, except you have them write a question they have and then answer it on the back and they're still exchanging cards. So anyway, any questions?
Do you ever use this for an area of confusion too, like a Muddiest Point or something?
Yes, yes. And often what happens is the muddy points come out when they're writing this, you know, and they're talking to each other about it.
Yeah. Because
then I always have them share, tell me something that someone told you. And they know that I'm going to do that. So that means they're going to have to really listen carefully. It's not a matter of, okay, I'm going to listen for 30 seconds to this person and then it's out of my head. Because I'm going to call on them to have them explain it. And then they'll say, I think we need clarification. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Have you ever used it as a takeaway for a field trip?
No, but that's a great idea. I've used it as a takeaway after watching a video clip. All right, good, thank you. Okay, and the next one is that,
I kind of unofficially put it on there.
All right.
So, I don't know if you all follow, if you talk about self-assessment, I don't know if you follow, this was over there.
Why don't you go there so they can see?
I don't know if you all follow John Spencer or any of his work. Anybody heard of him? He is a big PBL kind of guy, project-based learning, problem-based learning, and he has an entire book basically about, his book is actually called Empower, and it's about getting students to own the learning rather than having teachers own the learning and the assessment. And I know as a former classroom teacher, one of my areas of weakness sometimes was having my students peer assess and self-assess, because it's more about they think they have to have my feedback, and that's the golden piece of feedback to gain, when actually I should be the last person giving feedback on their learning. And so he does a lot with self-assessment, and basically it talks about a lot of his research. Basically the summary of it is that self-assessment is vital for metacognition. If we want our students to truly process their thinking about their thinking, they have to be able to sit back and self-assess. But a lot of times in the classroom, we assume our students know how to do that, and we assume that they are doing it, but yet we haven't explicitly taught them. So a lot of his strategies kind of come along alongside of that concept that our students don't always know how to do it when we expect that somewhere along the line they have, okay? So that's kind of the behind the scenes with him, and then I need to get to the other. That was just a tweet, and so I'm trying to get you interested. That's the bite, to get you to go look at some of his stuff. He has the idea of, and it kind of goes along with the idea of self-assessment, the self-assessment conference. Okay, the self-assessment conference is that part that our students crave. They want to meet with us, and they want to talk with us about the learning, and they want our feedback. And as a teacher, we have to say, hold on, have you done this for yourself yet? And taking them formally through that process, and then bringing that self-assessment to the conference and having students share their learning with you in a very specific way. And it is an individual meeting. And it's the idea, so at that point, really, your students might not notice, but really it's just kind of a presentation of their learning to you, with you, for you, and then you have the opportunity to reflect on that with them, and they'll end up talking through most of the conference rather than you spending all the time talking and giving them everything. They're actually, the roles reverse in this sort of moment. So this is just a quick snippet about that. This is something that actually changed the way my classroom ran in the last probably 3 or 4 years of my teaching. The idea of a self-assessment conference, it takes time, but students will come and seek you out after, I've had students where I've scheduled their time, and I'm sorry, I ran over and it's time to go home. Well, I can stay. And, because I taught high school English, I can stay, and they would come in for this conference. I mean, what a beautiful dream that your students want to sit and have this conference with you, because it's so valuable for you and for them. So this is just a quick snippet. Again, all of our resources are like tagged here, so you can, if you scan the QR code, you have access to all these links. So that's self-assessment in a nutshell, but the conference is a game changer. There's no more example of being an active learner than sitting with your professor and saying, here's my learning. It's kind of the moment I want you to have with that.
Okay, were you going to share the 3, 2, 1?
Yeah, sure, while I'm here.
While you're there.
Okay, so then the other thing that, so I work a ton with formative assessment, and let's see here. This is just kind of a strange, there we go. Okay, so I don't know, how many of you have used a 3, 2, 1 before? Okay, so we have kind of limited knowledge. Okay, so a 3, 2, 1 is basically a way that I use to assess what do my students know, what do they need to know, what do they have questions about. It's truly a formative moment where, and it puts it all in one place. Sometimes it's used as an exit ticket. A lot of the times I don't use it as an exit ticket. I will use this as a mid-lesson evaluation. Okay, we've been doing something for 20, 25 minutes, and I need to know where we're at with our thinking. So I actually hand out the 3, 2, 1 sheet. A 3, 2, 1 sheet, you collect 3 ideas of one kind, 2 ideas of another kind, and then 1 more piece of information in another form. Now there are tons of variations. So you could say, hey, 3 things I've learned today. So you think about that midpoint of the lesson. 3 things I've learned today, 2 questions I still have, and what's 1 goal I have for the rest of the class session. Or, you could collect this at the end for a next class session or something like that. What I often would do is I would give students a just 3, 2, 1 in a very generic kind of box moment like that. Sometimes I put cutesy pictures on it, depending on what we're doing. But I leave the 3, 2, 1 open and I give them a menu. Okay, if I have students, sometimes when I first started doing this, and students would say, well, I haven't learned 3 things. Like, I don't know, I'm really stuck in this learning. I haven't learned 3 things yet. So for me to ask them 3 things they've learned is really kind of a stressful moment. So then I was like, oh, why am I putting this requirement on here? So I opened it up to just be 3, 2, 1. So if students have learned 3 things, they're like, oh, well, that's gonna be my 3. Or I have 3 questions. Sometimes I have more than 3 questions. And so how am I going to fill this in? And it's not ever a requirement. It has to be filled out perfectly to the T. I want it in the next 30 seconds kind of thing. Because again, it's just a way for our students to provide feedback. If, particularly for students who aren't going to raise their hands, or, they're super quiet, they seem disengaged, but they're actually probably really engaged. This is a wonderful way to kind of just gather that feedback. So in this handout that's attached, there's lots of different variations, and I even put the Google search here for you of that comes back with some good ones. I put all the parameters on there for you. Here's some of the cutesy ones, but some of the menu that I've provided is the idea of facts from today, things I found interesting, questions I have for the next time, goals, things I've learned, questions I have about the lesson, feelings, emotions. Sometimes when your students are like, I taught high school English for a while, and sometimes I give students poems and they would be like, oh man. So it's like, it was easier to talk about emotions. I feel confusion. I feel, whatever. Then it's like, okay, there are 3 things with these different emotions. Then I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with that as a teacher. But really, it's a beautiful, wonderful lesson planner for you. It's like the students just plan the next day of learning for you sometimes. So you can then have students, it doesn't always have to be a passive, take your pencil and write it on a piece of paper, give it back to me kind of moment. You can also make them very interactive. So I've also used them in the past, like in a flip grid. Okay, give me your 3, 2, 1 in a flip grid, particularly when we were virtual learning. Some students would much rather tell you than write it down. So a flip grid's a great way to do that. And then they can respond to each other. I've done it with a Padlet. I've used Jamboards before, Edpuzzles, Nearpods, really any technological tool you want to apply to this concept, it's all fair game. So choose your favorite tech tool and run free. So I created, there are, in this sheet, I went ahead and just put 4 QR codes of examples of ones that I've done. So you can just kind of take a peek at them at your perusal. And, right now, if you wanted to, you could pull up the Padlet. If you wanted to, you could, and then post something, a 3, 2, 1 as well. I just set them up in categories, and the categories are fixed. But a lot of the times, again, I don't like to fix them. So I just do generic 3, 2, 1. So questions about that?
Shelley, I want to add, I actually use 3, 2, 1 for students to a reading assignment that I've assigned to them. They've got to submit their 3, 2, 1 before the next class. So instead of a exit ticket or a mid lesson, I do it as your reading assignment. You need to do 3, 2, 1, and I have different categories, but that's also been effective.
That's another great use of note cards. I'll hand out a note card and put the 3, 2, 1 just do it on a note card and not create a group.
What's the genius of the 3, 2, 1 versus just?
You try to use numbers, Mark. You use them all the time.
That's called a cross-curricular.
We're trying. We're not math people.
I just like that it's not just so open-ended for students. It does kind of give them a purpose. Now, and it's something that once I introduce it, then I can just say, okay, we're doing a 3, 2, 1 about this. And then they already know what I'm doing. So, and it's not like I don't use them every class session, but, maybe a couple times a semester or something, they already kind of know what it is. But there is no magical.
Although I have read research that says that open-ended really stops a lot of people, and saying, give me 3 things, giving them a number, whether that's a survey to people or in feedback or anything you want from students. If you tell them, if I say an assignment, tell me something about something you read, it'll be nothing. But if I say, tell me 3 things. Oh, okay, I'll do it.
Right, yeah. It's more
There's something
manageable.
about, and yeah, I read some research, I can't remember where it was, but I read a couple articles that say the number, how many you want.
And we all like to be specific and intentional when we're doing something. And so if somebody gives that to you, oh, I already know how to specifically answer this question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's less intimidating.
Yeah.
So Mark, something I was thinking is that if you think about what the 3-2-1 is asking students to do, it's asking them to not just think about what they're thinking, but to categorize what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, that moves you up the critical thinking, the higher order thinking, that you're now not doing basic thinking and call and recall and regurgitation, but you're now asking them to do higher order thinking, which to me, that's part of the beauty of this, that they aren't just throwing thoughts down. It has to be, okay, let's organize this into something that's coherent, which then moves them up the scale of higher order thinking.
I think at the same time, it draws a box, which is helpful for thinking, to have some boundary than some unknown amount.
And I've got like this example, like 3 things you learned, give 2 examples, and give 1 thing you're going to try in the classroom. Good. All right, thank you, Shelley. Good, all right.
I'm next.
You're up.
You know, I feel like we're trying to hustle because there's so many of us. I don't want to feel like we're hustling.
No.
But we need to hustle. So, well,
Keeps us active.
that's right. It keeps us active.
You need to stand up and move around.
Yeah.
Not out of breath. So, so my activity is called the Ring of Fire, and I have played Johnny Cash before. I'm not going to play Johnny Cash today, but I have played Johnny Cash before in the classroom, and students laugh and they think it's funny. But so Ring of Fire, I have no idea, honestly, if I came up with this or I saw it somewhere and stole it from someone. So I can't, I don't know. But anyways, we get into this. The first page, and I have a handout for you all. I'll hand it up here in just a second. The first page gives some science and some ideas behind why I do the Ring of Fire and the purpose of it. Then I have the actual active steps to this. So I'll go ahead and hand this out now that I've gotten your attention. So, okay, take one and pass it, please. So a few things about the Ring of Fire. So what is this? Well, you're going to see that it's actually, so don't go down yet, Shelley, but it's actually about students standing in 2 concentric circles. So one circle inside the other, and they have a partner that they're facing each other. And so with this activity, it's really just them turning and talking, but the Ring of Fire is we have 2 rings. So what are the things that we're gaining from this? Well, first of all, that I have the differentiated instruction. It's obviously, we all need to be differentiating our instruction. If you're like, well, what does that mean? That means using different learning activities for our students, because we all learn with different preferences. And so we all need to be doing different things with our content. So that way we are trying to reach our students that have variety of learning styles and learning preferences and that sort of thing. And so this activity, we are allowing for auditory learning. There's verbal and linguistic learning here. There's body kinesthetic because of movement, and interpersonal learning because students are talking with one another and they're verbally processing with someone else. And by the way, if you are an interpersonal person, so intrapersonal means, sorry, within yourself, like that's me. I really like to process and read, like leave me alone and let me read. It's good for me sometimes to step out of that and learn by talking. I learned different things sometimes. So it's good for us to have variety. The next paragraph there, this is just some science behind when you're moving. We know that the brain, the 2 main foods for the brain are oxygen and glucose. And when we move, we're increasing heart rate, which is increasing oxygen to the flow to the brain. So that's number 1, that's a good thing. So increasing one type of food for the brain. The other one is glucose, that we know that when we move, that actually triggers the release of glucose, which is the other brain food. So movement actually helps, like from a physiological and neurological standpoint, it actually helps the brain with learning, not just engagement, all those sorts of things. So we have neurologic reasons for movement. And then lastly, dopamine. I mean, dopamine is released negatively if someone would come in with a gun or something, that would release dopamine. But also dopamine is released for positive things when we anticipate a reward, or movement. So that's another reason for dopamine to release and why we should have movement of our body. And dopamine helps with connections in our brain. So it's a chemical that helps with neurotransmission. So there's a lot of positive reasons for movement, and I've just provided some of those for differentiated instruction and why it's good for our brains and why it increases learning. Okay, let's get to the Ring of Fire. So on the bottom of the first page, which you can see on the screen, this is how students line up, and this is what you see. This is 18 students. I've done this with 25. I've done this with 28 students. And you can see you just line up in 2 circles, and you have students facing each other, and they pair up. And if you have odd numbers, you can have, you know, 3 people. You can do it this way as well. So okay, you line up in this way first. Go ahead and scroll, Shelly, and if you flip over to the back side. And so what you do is I have 30 seconds per topic, and so I have a couple examples of topics. So Establishment Clause is in the First Amendment to the Constitution, which has impact for education. So we've talked about Establishment Clause, and we've talked about FERPA. We all should be familiar with FERPA, but education students, that's they learn that in their first course. So I've used this as a review time. We've already talked about a number of topics, and let's review and talk about this. This is good when we come back from a break, and we can get students active and learning. So what I do is we get in our circles. I put the different topics up on the screen, and then for 15 seconds, I have the insight partner. You're talking. You say as much as you can for 15 seconds, and that's not very long, but it is long enough they have to think. And the outside partner just listens. They can't say a word, they have to listen. And then you can see letter B, so 2B. For the other 15 seconds, I say switch, and the outside person, then they talk for 15 seconds about that topic without repeating anything from what the other partner said. So there's obviously verbal, there's auditory, you've got to listen, you've got to be processing what your partner is saying. All right, go to number 3. And then I have them rotate, and I use different so the outside or inside, and you can see outside I have them rotate clockwise, inside is counterclockwise. You can do however you want. But that way they're rotating and they get to a different person. And then we just repeat those steps until we've covered all of the topics that I have wanted to cover. Usually it's about 8 or 9 or 10 topics. This takes about 15 minutes. And then if you go to step number 5, it's already up on the screen. And then we just come back together, and I just verbally quickly go back through with everyone to make sure I hit all the high points, because this is great for our formative assessment. As I'm walking around, I'm listening to what they're saying. You can tell what they're missing because you hear what everybody is saying or isn't saying. And so then the step number 5, we come back together. I know that I'm going to say, make sure that they get the information for whatever it is they're missing. So it's a great way for them to get involved. So my last things here, the professor hack section, I've already talked about formative assessment. I use my timer on my phone all the time in class, but especially for this, because sometimes I get listening and walking and I forget what the time is. So it reminds me. I also play music. Melissa did. I play music all the time with this and everything else. But the reason I play music isn't just for fun, but it also creates some dissonance in the room. So it makes them focus on their partner and not what everything else, not the other people around them. And so they really have to focus in on what's being said. So I think it increases concentration for this. By the way, some students that are auditory, they pick up everything. I know that they're frustrated, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's part of the learning process as well, because it's not, entire class period frustration. And then lastly, I think college students won't like this because they're too cool or too old. They actually, some of them that are kind of don't want to stand up, they actually kind of get into it and like it to the end. So, all right, so that's Ring of Fire. Anyone have any questions or thoughts with this?
I just want to add to this. So I actually do this, but I call it inside outside circle. So that's funny.
There you go.
Ring of Fire is a much more catchy name. And another way I've done it is line up where they're in 2 parallel lines.
Okay, yeah.
And it is a beautiful formative assessment. I have done it like starting a class to review the day before. And they know, but I like to time. I don't time it. They just have to talk to each other. And the whole time I'm walking, and there are times that I will ask a question and there is silence. Like nobody says anything. And I say, oh, clearly we need to go over that again. And I mean and then they're kind of embarrassed, like they disappointed the professor. And I say, you know what, this is exactly why I'm doing this. This is a way, and obviously I'm teaching future teachers. This is a way for me to know as a professor, okay, I need to cover this material again or reemphasize it. So yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Thoughts or questions?
Maybe something similar, like it's a good get to know you thing in class, or just so they can meet each other. Or back to Jeremy, you mentioned the field trip, reflection on a field trip. It'll be like, what did you notice in this thing? And then, yeah, it's a lot of ways you can use it. We're going to stay on movement for a minute, and I want to talk about mnemonics and ways to learn things. So this is something I teach. One of my classes is educational psychology, which is kind of a foundational core. It's not in the foundational core. It's foundational core class for our majors. And we talk about the brain and learning as part of it. And I like to scare them a little bit because I give them this and I say, you have to learn 14 brain principles. Sorry, you can share them. It's just more to look at. You don't actually have to. I say you have to learn 40. Anytime you think of a list beyond 3, that's pretty stressful. But I want them to understand how the brain works to tie in. Is this a good strategy to use or is it not? And can I cut this out of my teaching? Well, if it ties into a brain principle, maybe you shouldn't cut it out. But I purposely give it to them in a form that's kind of intimidating. And then I give them a little time and I say, see how many you can just memorize, which doesn't go very far. We can't memorize very many. So what I do is teach a movement for each of them. And we talk about the power of mnemonics, first of all. And a lot of mine are very corny. And I've had them write mnemonics, and theirs are just as corny, but they're good. Mnemonics, and then a movement with them. So this gets them actually up and going too. So we're going to stand up, and I'm going to give you, a couple, and then I can show you how you discuss it. Okay, so the first one is 1. So you hold up the number 1, and I try to make them fit with the number. So 1, there's one sun in the sky. We can also do like a bell tower movement. There's one son of God, so that's related. But one sun. We're all unique. Our brains are all unique. There's no such thing as a normal brain. The more we study brains, we realize everybody's experience and everything is different. So that's 1. So 1 is sun genetically. And so then we'll break into more things about how we all learn differently. 2, I think of back in the 80s, especially, the designer label on pants was big. So you make your pants with your 2 and then you slap on your label, whatever you want it to be. So that's our label. We have to label things, we have to have the properties to them, and then the relevance of that label. That's how we learn, and that's how we tag things in our brain. Okay, so I do that with all of them. So you can sit back down. And we learn a few a day, and they're silly, and they come up with their own ones. So we do kind of the line that you talked about sometimes, the first 5 minutes of class, we practice them. And so after a while, they're starting to get them. And then I use Flipgrid, and if you want to pull that up, I'll just show you. Then they submit a Flipgrid, which is just a little video thing. And this is how I check if individually they know them. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of Olivia's. So they have to explain it and then pick out one application.
That shape the way that they learn. Number 2 is labels. That's the pants. That includes properties and relevance. And we organize, sort, and retrieve things based on the way that we label them. And that helps us to build the connections with it. Number 3 is the emotions. That's the E. And that includes the bicycle, and our emotions and cognition work together 80% of the time, and they overlap. So we need to make sure that we're engaging the emotions as we're engaging cognition, and that they can help develop one another. Number 4 is attention. Students have a hard time focusing, so we need to make make sure that we are grabbing their attention and helping them to manage it and be able to base their input.
Okay, you can stop, Kelly.
The adoptive.
But what happens is they all learn the 14 and they know them well, and I even check like the next fall when I have them in a different class, like how many brain principles can you remember? And they remember them because they practiced them. They're silly. Some have come up with like 12, I do a dozen eggs. One of my students, I just watched her, she did the 12 disciples and one went bad. And that's why the social conditions are important. That's what that one goes with. So, you know, bullying and things like that affect the classroom. So anyway, so it gives a lot of movement. It's really fun seeing them totally intimidated, thinking I'm never going to learn 14 things and actually be able to apply them and think. And then by this point, then I can ask them different questions. Okay, here's the strategy. What does this tie into? What brain principle? Yeah, so that's a fun one to do. All right, where are we next? I think we're about, any questions on that?
Your yellow paper, do you use color more?
I do use we use a lot of color paper in our department. Yeah. Look at Ben. Yeah, but he has the budget. He's thinking they're costing me more for color paper. Students really like the different colors of paper. Does anyone else use it? They remember certain things, like, oh, that was on that purple sheet. Yeah, it helps us with our
fine thinking.
Yeah.
They can find it.
That
They can hold it up.
key items that I want them to be able to come back to by listed color.
Yeah.
The blue sheet or whatever.
Yeah. All right. Any questions? And I think we've kind of hit the last one. So any questions, or are there any ways could you share something you might do that you'd like to share with the group, or how you might apply one of these?
I've done the a movement thing that I learned it a year ago, well, last spring, seems like a year ago. It conveys Best Teacher Institute as an online thing. One of the things that in his new book was on movement, and he called it pedagogy of getting out too. But the idea is to go on a walk with somebody and talk. So, and that movement and that one-on-one conversation can be helpful. So I did that even with my freshman writers, and we're in Euler, so I just said, okay, go around the block. And it woke my teacher aid. So yeah, I do think that movement really clicks, the movement and the numbers, because, and the brain principles. I memorize scripture when I run, and I have to count them on my fingers, and so that's why it works. I just learned why it works.
Yeah, that's neat. There is a thing I put on there, like the rule of the 1 minute rule, but when they look at students of any age, like we can attend to something like a lecture, we can attend to it. They kind of have the rule of 1 minute per year. So like a 4-year-old can pay attention maybe 4 minutes, and then you got to switch it up. Doesn't mean you have to stop and do something totally different, but it might be a parent share or stand up and talk to someone else about what you just learned or whatever. But so college students, 18 to 22 minutes. So if you're doing 3 different kinds of shifts, and our brain needs to talk about every 12 minutes. And you notice that if you're by yourself and you start talking out loud, and you realize, and that's why our brain needs to talk. So they're either going to talk to somebody, or they're going to talk about what you want them to talk about. So the more we can involve them, the better that is. So
I heard faculty are like a 10-12 minute limit.
Oh, probably.
Before you have to change things up or you lose faculty.
Yeah, that would make sense. Anyone else have things they do, or?
Carrie, the circle of fire thing,
Fishbowls.
That's it. I couldn't think of the name of it. I was gonna say it.
Fishbowl discussions, but you're not doing the one-on-one, you're doing more of the small group and large group observations and so on. But it's a similar approach.
Explain that a little, because I've seen you do that, and yeah.
So a fishbowl discussion basically is working on the listening as well as the conversation. So you have a group inside who is dialoguing about some sort of topic while the outside is listening, and the outside can't talk while the inside is talking. And then you eventually open it up to the outside to kind of comment on what has been said. And then you eventually swap. And so the outside then comes inside goes outside. So that works really well with short stories if you're working with multiple stories or different topics, different essays, different concepts. But you have to have kind of this break between ideas, because the center group covers everything, the outside group doesn't have anything to talk about. So it takes some foreplanning, but it's a great way to get them all part of the conversation.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Let's hear who wants to do movement in your class. Anybody want to try that?
And some things, and a lot of students will resist, they'll groan, and it's such a big deal, but it's important.
And the reality is, for those of us who do a lot of movement, COVID kind of
that's been a hard
dampened
thing.
a little bit
Right.
of it. So it's been harder to get
sure.
back in the habit of doing it.
Yes.
I still did Ring of Fire even last year, but we were masked and there was a little more space. And it's only 30 seconds and then we move.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it fell within all those realms, and it was
Euler allows
good.
that, Reed doesn't allow that as much.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah.
We were more of a oval in some ways instead of a ring, but yeah.
Yeah, I did mine. And same thing, you had to stay socially distanced, and it was hard.
Anything else?
With the Ring of Fire, let me talk a little more about what kind of content does it lend itself to? I can see like the reviewing, you have kind of, content to review or open-ended things, but I don't know, it seems like it's pretty flexible technique. But.
It is. Just thinking for you, and I mean, I don't know upper level math, but could you put a math problem of some kind on the board, and then they have to talk, whether it's a proof, verbally talk through what's happening, and the other partner has to just listen and check or see what they're missing, or maybe after 15 seconds or whatever, they've only gotten a certain distance through to solving the problem, and then the next person has to pick up from there and move to the rest of the solution or whatever. I don't know if that would be helpful. That might be really difficult.
You could have the cards.
Yeah, and you could have cards where they're like, they do the card and then you give it to the next person.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's a long enough problem where you do that and then you rotate, and then the next person has to take a card and then move to like finish the problem or whatever. I don't know if that could be.
It's kind of like the teaching. I know you are big on having students teach students. It's kind of a version of that, it seems like.
Maybe you found a sentence diagram. I had even drawn there. Past a sentence.
Oh, yeah.
True. Yeah.
Sing part of the song, then I have to pick it up.
It's a little bit, I had the students, they were doing a process recording, so they were having to write dialogue, what's going on between a client and they were having to demonstrate different skills with this and technical skills. But it was interesting because I had them do that in groups on the board. So we had like 3 going on at the same time. But what was interesting is then I had them shift so that they had to see if the next group, were their skills right? Did they, so it was interesting to have that movement with that.
I think it's helpful to remember we don't have to add necessarily. It's just kind of go through, mentally think of your class period. Okay, how many times are we shifting things or involving them, requiring them to show their learning and to help each other learn, etc. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel on everything. Good. Well, I think it's time to stop. So we really appreciate you all coming.
Thank you all. Thank you. And you said this is will be electronically.
I sent Janelle at the
Okay,
beginning of this a PDF. I hope she posted it. I don't know if she has yet or if she didn't see my email. But
yeah.
That's not a copy of that.
And I think if you do this code, it takes us to that sheet, which then will take you all the different. So
Oh, great, great. Thank you.
All right, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everybody online. Oh,
Yes.
Chat.
Oh, that might have been,
Oh, was it?
oh, so we already got that one.
But Carol, I